right, we've been talking about the wrestling history on television. We have been since the Pfeffer file visit that I had up at Notre Dame, and we've been going through some of the things that we got, and we uncovered because we talked previously about the history of wrestling on television, and the earliest that anybody was coming up with was 1947 for Los Angeles, and at 1946 they signed on the air in St. Louis or something, and did something with Bill Longson on a talk show, whatever. But then through these letters from your friend and mine, I.T. Flatto, not only the attorney for Jack Pfeffer for many years, but also the promoter of the Ridgewood Grove Arena, or is it Ridgewood Garden? We'll get to it in a second. But anyway, point being, we saw them talking about the NBC original commercial telecast that went to a select few people in the New York metropolitan area that were broadcasting wrestling in 1939 and 1940. And that was, something that we were talking about a couple of weeks ago. Well, we've got a couple of things. We're going to go back in time, and we'll start in the modern era of 1939 and 1940, and then we'll go back further than that. But we were talking about the magazine Transmitter from NBC that, Brian, you sent me a link to, and these are on the internet. How did you find it?
I forget what I Googled, but I Googled something and that was one of the hits. But if you Google NBC Transmitter, it'll come right up.
It's the in-house trade magazine for the National Broadcasting Company, and specifically, it was they were radio, the network, and also the record end of the business and everything for those people who liked music in their homes. And they were experimenting with television. And so the in-house magazine, Richard, sent a piece that he researched the same file you did. And he says in the 1940 collection of NBC transmitters, page 2 of the February edition, you'll find the following passages. And this is from the magazine of that time. NBC television ended the year 1939 having put on 668 individual programs in the 8 months from April 30, 1939 to January 1st, 1940. The schedule was on average 5 days a week, 2 hours a day, for a total of about 360 hours, or an average of a little over 10 hours a week. That was when television was on the air in one place in the country. The programs were made up of approximately 1/3 from the studio, 1/3 film, and 1/3 outdoor pickups. And some of the shows were, Brian, most of the Brooklyn Dodgers professional football games, the 6-day bike races at Madison Square Garden. Remember, that was a thing back in those days. The Bear Nova fight. That was Max Bear was the heavyweight champion at the time, and the father of the guy who played Jethro on the Beverly Hillbillies for the kids. What was Nova's first name? I keep wanting to say Aldo, but that'd just be a fantasy.
Mike Busey.
No, quit it. No.
Or Bucci, however you pronounce him.
No, it wasn't a Lou Nova. He was a more modern boxing figure, wasn't he? Anyway, I can see you're impressed about Nova.
I don't know.
they also did the television ball from the Waldorf Astoria, the premiere of Gone with the Wind at the Capitol Theater, and the weekly boxing and wrestling matches from the Ridgewood Grove Arena. And it said our television audience, this is where I wanted to go with this, because the Ridgewood Grove Arena, again, is the one we found the letters where they were complaining that they had spent money to he was complaining they had outfitted the arena for television and wanted to continue on the experimental basis of not paying for it.
He wanted $50.
He wanted $50 a week, goddammit, and $100 for the boxing. But anyway, this concludes with our television audience, and this is in New York City. And at the time, and again, we may find out shit. We're finding out all kinds of stuff, but nobody else was transmitting television in the United States because NBC was in the process of working it out, right? So we've established that. So this would be the total television audience, not just in New York, but nevertheless, to be estimated in the neighborhood of 2,000 home receivers as of January 1st, 1940. And as we've said, a lot of those were either in the RCA executives, the technological folks that were working on the project had these in their homes, and some rich people and connected people. And it goes on to say, with the average of 4 or 5 persons per receiver, as indicated in an early survey, it means that our potential audience is between 8 and 10,000. That originally, if you had a television in your home, not only would everybody in the house probably be watching if it was on, but you would have people over. So the very earliest estimates were, 4 or 5 people are watching each set every time that we do something on average, which meant maybe the chairman of RCA, General David Sarnoff, was home alone in his den, but there was 10 people over at the fucking production engineer's house.
Well, the other thing is, back then, too, how many people turned on a TV set alone? I mean, was it a big deal? Hey, I'm going to turn on the TV. They'll be programming from 2 to 4 on Wednesday. Yeah. So come over.
Hey, when I was a kid, there had to be one person watch the picture and one person behind fiddle with the rabbit ears. But I digress. That's why, as we'll talk about later on here today, if we get to it, the average, they now count number of viewers because all the statistics are so minute. But the way that television ratings evolved for years through the 90s, I believe they counted the homes, not the individual viewers. They did separate surveys, and they had an average number of viewers per home, which went down steadily. In 1953, if you had a TV, it was one TV in the whole house. It was like 3.5 people per home were watching or whatever. And by the late 80s, early 90s, it was like 1.5 person, per home. And then now it's just figured in a completely different way. But so you had, they were shooting these things or airing these things for basically most of the people that were able to watch them were either in the homes of RCA executives and or friends, and they were trying to work it out. And that's 1939 and 1940. So we've established that, and I've got, hold on, I thought I had another, God damn it, wait a minute.
Well, I guess the thing too is
maybe
that
I don't.
If there was anything before this period of time, it seems more than likely it could only be experimental and based out in New York and probably the future WNBC Channel 4 that we're talking about. Forget the exact initials. I don't have this in front of me.
Well, yes. Well, I'm going there, but I thought I had something else about 1939 first. I thought, but nevertheless.
And maybe you'll answer this. I don't know. But the other question I have is when you did the breakdown about what was currently airing, I think it was 1/3 in the studio, 1/3 live events, 1/3 on the street or whatever it was. When did they do the first live remote? Or when did they first start doing that? Because then we kind of have an idea when they even had the capabilities of wiring the Ridgewood Grove Arena or whatever it is.
See, that's the thing is outdoor pickups. I don't know if that means that they went outside, shot it, and then came back and broadcast it, or whether I would have to think, I don't know if they were trying to broadcast live on an outdoor location at that point, but probably somebody's going to tell us. But that was basically the fine point of the thing.
Yeah.
But, Brian, and you sent me this, you know what I'm going into here, because I don't know what this guy's name is, because you said this is off of Reddit, and I don't know how Reddit works, but it's a page from Reddit.
Yeah, it was.
What is this fellow's name that's done this research?
I don't even know. Someone sent this to us. It was from the Squared Circle page on Reddit, and it's someone who listened to the segment you did, talking about what you discovered at the Pfeffer Library about the earliest known broadcast in the United States of a professional wrestling show, and he had his own research.
And it was W2XAB that were the call letters that letter from up in, where is Schenectady or whatever. But anyway, this fellow has searched for the old listings in newspaper archives, and he found a television listing. Well, it was an article, I guess, or an announcement or whatever, August 27, 1931 issue of the New York Evening Post, where W2XAB announced they plan to air an experimental wrestling match. And the August 23rd edition of the Brooklyn Daily Eagle said that they plan to experiment with different lenses and tinted backdrop screens to enhance the picture quality of its boxing and wrestling telecasts. So they're announcing this that finally is listed, and there's a clipping here of their, and we'll get to this lineup on their experimental television in a minute. But the 15-minute broadcast, simply listed as wrestling match, was broadcast at 10 p.m. on September 17th, 1931.
Wow.
30 years before my birthday. Eddie says by November 1931, boxing and wrestling were among the most popular W2XAB offerings. But let's stop here for a second.
How big was that audience? If a little 10 years later, 9 years later, whatever it was only 2,000 transmitters. How big was the audience in 1931?
Well, see, here is the thing is I don't believe there was technically an audience. I think because, and I don't know, a lot of these, since RCA and NBC was connected to radio also, and that was the reason for the NBC Transmitter magazine, the in-house magazine that we were talking about earlier. And that was the reason why the radio listings back then were this in the newspaper every day, like the television listings became. So I'm wondering if they listed the experimental television broadcast in conjunction, possibly because it says M107 2850K. It's got the frequencies. Was this a radio oriented broadcast as well? Whatever the case.
Why did everything sound more like the future then than now?
It does, right?
X25 exactly. Here on the air.
Yes. But here's what I'm going to say is before we talk about the wrestling programs, and I'll read a couple other things here in a second, but it says they plan to experiment with different lenses and tinted backdrop screens.
Yeah, that's what I was going to ask you about. What does that mean? Where are they?
Well, here's the thing. They says there were limitations. The director fellow was credited William A. Schutt, Schudt. Should he should or he shouldn't? Was credited with inaugurating the early programs, but there were limitations. Boxers and wrestlers alike had to compete in a miniature ring and could easily fall out of the view of the camera. They also fought in a dark studio for the projector's benefit.
Yes, that's what I was wondering, yeah.
Airing blonde competitors was a hassle. In the early 1970s, a couple of Nick Goulas's TVs, like from Huntsville, were so cheap that when the interns were there and they'd shoot them across the ring in their fucking white outfits, it'd just bleed all the way across. It said, which meant light or dark backgrounds were needed to account for each wrestler's hair color. But for the limited audience back then, these minor issues didn't matter. And he says he cannot 100% confirm whether the broadcasts were professional wrestling or amateur wrestling. But one would think if they had a ring, even for boxing, there wasn't a lot of difference in amateur and professional wrestling at that point in people's minds, and there wasn't a lot of amateur wrestling programs. So I think we're looking at but here's the point I was going to make with the backgrounds and the different lenses. I don't think there was an audience. I think this was, remember, we saw, what was it? It was footage of the early George Hackenschmidt. What did Hackenschmidt footage where he was working out with somebody and that was the film they found?
Yeah, I think so. From England.
And yes, and I think, this was kind of a thing where they just had boxers box or wrestlers wrestle, and there's no indication there was any kind of studio audience, and they weren't in an arena if they were experimenting with backgrounds. But listen to this schedule, Brian. From 2 p.m. to 6 p.m. was experimental programs. I have no idea what that might contain.
Sounds far out. I wish I could see that.
Groovy, man.
Experimental TV. Yeah.
Hey, just make sure you don't go too far. But then from 8 o'clock until 11 o'clock every 15 minutes. At 8 o'clock, Helen Rowland, contralto. 8:15, sketch, Shadows of the Night. 8:30, How to Finger the Violin with Vincent Sorcy.
Oh, boy.
8:45, Natalie Towers, Characterizations. 9 o'clock, Miniature Musical Comedy. 9:30, Mystery Sketch, The Television Ghost. 9:45, Dave Franklin, Songs. 10 o'clock, Experimental Wrestling Match. 10:15, Elliot Jaffe, Songs. 10:30, Abigail Pericles, Songs. And the last program of the day, 10:45, Cartoons Drawn While You Look.
That's a fascinating show right there.
And none of this could have been live. They had to be filming it first and then broadcasting it, one would think, because they couldn't. How are you going to have a fucking mystery sketch followed by songs, followed by, and here comes the wrestlers?
The other day, one of the listeners, and I apologize for not remembering who it was because they deserve credit. They may have sent it to you too. They sent me some sort of video on YouTube. It looked like it was a History Channel kind of show, but I don't know if it was on the History Channel, about Philo Farnsworth versus RCA versus Sarnsworth. Or not Sarnsworth, Sarnoff, excuse me.
Sarnoff. Sarnoff and Farnsworth. Boy, that sounds like a law firm.
But it was all about that feud. And remember, part of the issue was the patents that Farnsworth had, that he created, was better visually. It used more, I guess, resolution, more, I don't know how to phrase it.
What to say? Same lines. The 525 lines, I think, was the standard for a long time that they went to. And I think that was his.
So when you talk about this being shot and the wrestler's hair color being an issue, remember, this wasn't the technology eventually that RCA was able to use and NBC was able to be formed because of this. This was whatever RCA was developing on their own to the point where they needed to somehow get Farnsworth's patents.
Well, but besides that, I mean, with all due respect to Philo, if you put the picture that his concept could deliver on the receiver that existed at the time and showed it to somebody today, they'd say, my God, anybody looked at that? It still wasn't, goddamn high def, boom, boom, 4K. Again, I'm only 63 still for another 4 weeks or so. But when I was a kid and my grandmother stayed with us, and was recovering from surgery and had brought some of her things from home, and her little television that was probably from, at the time, 1952. It was a 12-inch screen, black and white, obviously, and it was hard to tell what the fuck was going on the Twilight Zone, much less what they were using that had been manufactured 20 years earlier and wasn't even perfected yet. So,
And again, this is coming from RCA. If I'm hearing everything you're saying correctly and understanding it, I think it's RCA. This is before Rockefeller Center. So wherever they were shooting any of the studio stuff, wrestling or anything else,
it was in Schenectady.
it was in Schenectady. It wasn't.
It was
New
in
York.
Schenectady. Because that's at that time, who would have thought that the biggest money-making enterprise in the history of the world about to happen was coming from Schenectady?
Farnsworth was out of Philadelphia. Did he ever do any experimental broadcasts? Because again, if we're just talking about one company, the one that ended up winning.
Well, hold on and then Google this, you son of a gun, because you're quicker at it than I am. But I am still, and I'm trying to think all of the documentaries I've just watched, but Farnsworth was never able to finance anything like the NBC, system on his own. He came up with the concept, and the patents and things on his deal, but was not able to put anything like this in motion.
According to the internet, and they're never wrong.
Never.
Philo Farnsworth conducted experimental television broadcasts from the early 1930s, notably through his station W3XPF in Philadelphia, and later W9WFT in Fort Wayne.
And ain't nothing plain about Fort Wayne. But what was he? What did we need? Well, who was backing him here? What was? Did he have an entire network behind him like NBC did, or was
I don't think he had that. But
shouting into the wilderness.
I mean, he had investors, and I don't know how much money was pouring into different times, and he was always searching for more investors because, the philosophy was to try to bankrupt him, making him fight for the rights to his own patent for years and years and years.
Well, then if Philo and Flatto had gotten together, can you imagine that? I'm booked next Tuesday for Philo and Flatto.
I just don't understand how you call like an office up like, "Hi, honey, is he there? It's IT Flatto." That name.
But nevertheless, if Philo had only found Flatto, maybe he would have been broadcasting how to finger the violin. But, a lot of this stuff, there was things going on that we didn't know. And now, 1931, September 17th, a wrestling match that was recorded somehow at some point was broadcast at 10 o'clock Eastern time, I assume. I think that was before they had such a thing.
Now we have to figure out what that is.
On W2XAB.
There has to be a way. We have to figure out what that match is. I may be crazy research from back in the day, but there must be something somewhere.
Well, no, because again, they probably brought him in and just had him in the miniature ring they were using for boxing and experimented with the lighting and had them wrestle it and nobody was there. So unless Pfeffer kept notes on it.
Hey. It's the right time. It's the right time period. But now this is all fascinating. So we went from thinking it's one thing to another thing. Now we think it's
we're 15 years. We've added 15 years just with bringing this topic up and getting everybody to chip in and talk about it.
Well, we're now at
that ain't bad.
We're now at 1931. We need to try to find out more information about what that match was, where it was, anything from 31, and then fill in the gaps between 31 and 40.
You know what? I feel like Carl Kolchak in The Night Strangler when he was with Wally Cox in the newspaper morgue, and they were finding a series of similar murders happened every 21 years back to 1880. Man, should we try 1920?
I'm so happy that MeTV is finally taking Kolchak off. I like Kolchak, but it's the same episodes over and over and over nonstop.
Yeah.
So now it's the Adventures of Superman have been added to Saturday nights.
That are the same episodes over and over nonstop.
But they haven't been on in a while. They haven't been on.
But poor Carl. No, they're on.
Well, it's more than one season.
They're on handy TV every Sunday morning.
But there's multiple seasons of the Adventures of Superman. Is one season of Kolchak.
That's not even a long season.
No.
I think it's 24 episodes. I could be wrong. But I so seldom am. Why would we assume that?
And again,
all right,
like
anyway.
If they come up with an HD transfer of the Masters, then I'd want to watch it. But it has to look like Mannix. It can't look like canon. It has to be top of the line, look good, not this like, we have a VHS copy, we're going to air it.
If you found a kinescope of this 1931 wrestling match, would you want to watch it as it is, or would you want to have it remastered?
I would say, holy shit, we have just discovered that they discovered kinescope years earlier than we thought they did. That'd be what I said.
Well, see, I'm working on that too. We're gonna go the Wayback Machine with those kinescopes also.
It's really interesting just to think about, like, let's say from this point in time until 1950. Let's use that as the after the war, kind of when TVs really start being sold. Just everything came together. Eventually they have networks, they have channels, they have programming schedules. Like, everything came together within these years, and the war threw everything off, obviously, but I love this stuff. I'm sorry, I'm just geeking out over here. I apologize.
Well, Larry, it never, the view never changes, baby.